Thank you all for coming tonight. We're kicking off the budget meetings. And I would ask Saira, if I got it right, to please take the roll call.
Greg? He's
Greg.
here. Okay.
He's here.
Molly?
Here.
Lozelle? Brad? Theodore? Steph? Raquel?
Here on Zoom.
Robert? Rick? Denise? Stephanie?
Here.
Elise? Here. Mike?
Here.
And Jefferson is excused, and we have a vacancy in District 2.
So we've got enough members to move ahead. The first item is election of officers. We need a chair. It's an enviable duty. I'm happy to chair, but I'm happy to share. So if someone would like to, don't shake your head, Elise. And we also need a vice chair because the chair could get hit by a bus crossing 99, trying to get the chapters to get coffee. So it's important to have a backup plan. So yes, Mike.
I move that we nominate you as chair.
Second.
Does anyone want to have discussion on this? I'm calling for the question. Would you care to vote on this? All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Aye. Oh, okay, unanimous. Do we have folks interested in being vice chair?
Not that he's coincidentally not here, but Jefferson. It's true.
Usually, and that's appreciated. I think usually they try and have a citizen do it, if possible. And if no citizen wants it, we will go for Jefferson, but Elise.
I would like to nominate Greg Meehan at the end of this table as vice chair.
I have another volunteer as well. Lozelle also offered her willingness. So if the two of you wanted to step outside and arm wrestle or. Oh.
Easily defer.
Are you still interested or have you run in? Okay, good. I would entertain a motion.
I'll amend my motion. I would like to nominate Lozelle Mathai
Second.
to vice chair.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, unanimous. You are the next victim. Well done. Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. The minutes will be done by the 18th for sure. We're running late on head count. And we'll check into that because the only concern I have on that one is just making sure that as we go along, the record is appropriate. And if you get 2 weeks out, people may or may not recall what happened. So, okay, do we have any public comment?
No public comment at the time.
No comment at this time. You know, 7:15 is possible. Okay. Overview of budget and general changes, I believe. Over to you, Katie.
Can you put the budget on the screen, Zaira? So I gave you guys some handouts. We had a couple updates to some pages. Some of the graphs were out of date, which we realized after we'd printed everything. And then we had left off one person off the department head list. Sorry, Ian. So we reprinted that as well. So there's just a couple pages. We wanted to give you the updated pages because we've already fixed them. But can you go to page 16, Zaira? So we're going to talk about the general fund revenues.
Before you get started, Katie, Raquel is ill tonight.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to call out, thank you for being with us tonight on Zoom. I really appreciate it. I meant to do that before and I forgot. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Are you able to make it a little bit bigger? So people can see it? Okay. Okay. So starting with general fund resources, I'm just gonna kind of highlight some of the bigger areas that have changed. So obviously, we talked a lot about beginning fund balance at the last meeting, so I'll probably kind of skip over that one because we kind of know where that's derived from. Property taxes, that number kind of came up because you have to look at the trends in your district. So because we've had a lot of new properties added to the tax rolls, it's been very high in the past couple of years. It's varied between 5% and 9%. Knowing with the economy possibly going into a recession, we wanted to kind of err on the cautious side. So we budgeted at a 5% increase instead of going with a more aggressive 7 or 9%. So that is reflected there. A lot of the franchise fees are projections based on what we've actually received in the past few years, because those can also vary. So we wanted to try and get those a little bit more accurate to what we've been actually collecting on those. The local marijuana taxes are kind of riding about the same. Where those have been kind of down this year a little bit. So we're kind of anticipating those to be flat. The community development is all of our building permits. So we're expecting those to go up a little bit just based on the construction and building that we're experiencing in the city. The police grants, that's the other half of the body worn camera grant that we're going to be expending next year. And then going through the state shared revenue, the state liquor tax is expected to go up. These are numbers that we get from the state directly. So those are anticipated to go up next year because alcohol is going up, whereas marijuana is going down. And a lot of the marijuana is going down because of passing of Measure 110, because now all of the marijuana revenue is being diverted for the mental health. So that is affecting cities negatively. So we will be receiving less marijuana revenue in the future. There was some legislation out there that the state was kind of bouncing around, trying to make cities whole, just because that's a hit to cities' general funds, but it doesn't look like that's anticipating to pass. So we're just expecting to receive less marijuana revenue. And of course, this cigarette revenue is also declining, which is good. Not for us, but for people smoking. Yeah, for health reasons, that's always good. And then our Dundee contracts, the planning contract and the police contracts, those are set amounts that we have on the contracts. And then kind of skipping down a little bit, it's the same thing with the CCRLS reimbursement. That's a fixed rate that we have on the contract with them. The traffic fines, we're expecting to be back to pre-COVID times. So last year we had budgeted $500,000 and we did not collect nearly that much this year just because COVID was still going on and we just weren't ticketing. But we're anticipating things to start going back to normal and start receiving the fines for that like we were in the past.
So everyone lower your speeds by 5
Yeah.
miles per hour.
Exactly. And then interest rates, as we've all heard, interest rates are going up and we have a lot of cash in the bank. So we're anticipating getting really good returns on those, which is good money for our general fund and other funds that have cash in there. And then of course, TLT revenue directly comes into the general fund, and we're expecting tourism to go back to pre-COVID times just because that's what we've been receiving this year, has been back to almost 1920, 1820 times. So yeah, it's been very good. So we're expecting that transfer in for TLT to be as good or better. And that's just kind of a general overview. Does anybody have any specific questions on any of the general fund revenues?
Can you remind me what CCRLS stands for?
I may need Will to tell me that.
So through our intergovernmental agreement that we have with the library district, which covers 3 different counties, we get some funding and it's based upon how much circulation our books do versus the other libraries in the system. And lately, we've been doing very well.
Court improvement fees, why wouldn't it just be court fees for like fines or whatever? Why do you call it improvement fees?
I think those are just because we've moved back to in-person court, so we have expenses related to that, to having it in person. I think we just refer to it as court improvement.
Any other questions?
All right, we will move on to general government, which is on page 17. So for general government, we have budgeted in here the council compensation that we discussed at council. So for the committee who wasn't at that council meeting, the way that we do council compensation is very outdated and it's very time consuming to the staff. So right now we pay, I think it's $10 a meeting for every counselor. And then we pay them twice a year based on a timesheet. It's just a lot of manual work. And Sue, our city recorder, she did a lot of work looking at other cities to see how they pay counselors. And it looks like most of them have gone to a stipend, like a monthly stipend. And it seems to be the general amount that other cities are paying is around $200 a month per counselor. So that is what I have budgeted here, is $200 a month per counselor. And of course, the mayor would still be his same $300 a month. So that would, we wanted to put it in the budget and have the budget committee approve it so that council was kind of not approving their own salary raises. But just so you know, that's where that number comes from. And then Will, did you want to talk about some of the other professional services?
Yeah, so most of the other items are either the same or there's a very slight increase just because of inflation effects. However, I did add an extra $10,000 under professional services simply to allow for the council directing us to do something new in the new year. Obviously, it's an election year, so things might change. There might be some new council direction, there might not. This is just to give a buffer against anything like that happening.
And across all of the departments and all of the funds, you're going to see this internal charge admin support services. So that is from our Fund 31, which is, like I mentioned before, that's a internal service fund. So it's a cost reimbursement for our internal administrative services that we provide, like finance, utility billing, IT. So those charges we'll talk about when we talk about Fund 31, but mostly they're derived by the cost of all the administrative staff and all of the administrative overhead that's shared, like the telephones, the cost of internet. So those tend to vary just based on things that have increased for administrative services.
Go ahead, Rick.
So Katie, just a question, maybe this is just the procedure that we're going to do, but the overall budget view, are we going to talk about that later? Things like the full-time equivalents, or when are we going to talk about that?
Yeah, we can anytime. I wasn't
Anytime.
specifically going to talk about those, but
Okay,
if you guys
I just
had
have,
questions,
yeah, I have one
absolutely.
question that I'm sure that everyone in public will ask. If you look at it, it looks like we're increasing 5.69 FTEs, but I don't, and that's page 12. I don't know that to be actually the case, but I just want to make sure that we can explain it to whoever might ask.
Yes, and a lot of that was because of reorganization of staff among, like for the library, for example, we had somebody that left who was part-time and we increased a couple other positions to make them full-time positions. So it looks like an increase of FTE of our people, but really it was one FTE that left. So it's just kind of reorganization on that. We did increase some FTE in planning. That was not in the budget.
19 and 20 is the same.
And there was one actual plus FTE, which was the Spanish language librarian.
Yes, yes,
That's part of that.
yes. Yep.
And so maybe as we go through each group, if we could ask staff to speak to their head count, if it's up or down or the same or more, and then that will, the right people will be able to answer the question as to what's going on.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
That'd be great. Somebody's lights on over there.
Fine.
Elise.
I was just gonna, one note, I mean, it looks like 2019, 2020, that FTE count, and then what's being proposed for this year is the same number. So it looks like you just had flex and basically COVID, right? Okay. And then also back on the page 17, I just had a question around community support. In 1920, it was 128,000, and then it's dropped down to 10. What comes out of that specific?
So that line item is kind of a council directed line item. Clearly in previous years, council must have
I have no idea what
had
that is. No.
some need for the really huge number. I don't know. But I would imagine the current council would prefer to see it down at the sort of lower number that it is now.
Well, I don't know. I might not prefer to see it down. I mean, truly, I don't, what was that for?
I can
129?
tell you.
Okay.
It was, we used to have all the community groups come in and ask the budget committee
I remember that. Yeah,
for money.
that was that.
Yeah, so that's what that was. And
We never, no, we didn't.
No, we haven't done it.
we haven't
No,
done it in a
I
while.
know, that's what I'm saying. It's 128,000 on 2019, 2020.
So
But I was
what's-
here then. We've
What
never
something
approved
is
anything.
budgeted is not necessarily what is spent. So what you're looking at is the budget and not necessarily what actually got spent. Right?
And I
What?
think part of
No,
that,
no, You
we-
establish a budget. These
We
numbers.
agreed
come
not to
from
do it
plans,
anymore.
Right?
That's not my understanding of a budget. These are.
Oh, these are
spent.
the actuals? Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think part of that
What did we spend on?
128,000 was the CARES Act money was booked there.
Okay,
Yeah, so I think that's why it was so much larger.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like what we did for the utility bill. all that
Yes.
kind of stuff. Thank you.
Lozelle?
So last year, there was talk about diversity training, and I wanted to know, is that in the budget for this year?
I don't specifically know about that one.
So specifically as a called out program, no,
No, it was training for the employees, the staff.
right. As I say, specifically, that's not a budget line item that's in here. Although having just arrived, I do have plans to go down that direction, but
Is it money to do that?
yes.
Okay.
And I'll just for anybody else, it is a council goal, right? DEI is a council goal, so.
Maybe when we go through departments, we could ask about that specifically at each department, how much money is in their training and what that will look like.
Yeah, that sounds very reasonable. I haven't had time in the last 7 months to formulate my DEI approach, but I have been thinking about it.
So maybe we could take that as an open and next week you could come back with not a plan, but the thing is asking people, if you have them come up tonight and they didn't know you were going to ask what their plans were, that they won't give you a thoughtful answer. So if we ask going forward that, do we have a plan for this? And if you can come back and as people go through, I just don't want to trip up staff when they come in to do their presentation and we throw something at them. So it's an open, we'd like you to close. How's that?
And to be honest, the truthful answer would be that this is a council goal. It needs to be done. And I have not had the time to start to work on this one just yet with all the other things I had to fix.
Yep, not a problem. Good question. Ben. Any other questions? Okay, keep going.
All right,
These are
and we'll
actuals.
move on to page 19, court. So for the FTE count, so court has a percentage of Zyra, and then our court administrator is in here full time. So I believe the percentage of Zyra is like 34% or whatever. It's a funny FTE. That. sorry. And then we also have our judge in here as part of the salary amount too, but that's a contracted employee. And then looking down at the materials and services. We had an increase to the travel and training. That's to account for the in-person conferences and then to account for Zyra attending some with our court administrator this year. The maintenance agreements are gone up just for some of our court software that we have. It's just part of the contract that has a annual increase to it. And then the court costs and court improvements are also tied to the in-person court that is now in session versus the last couple of years. It's all been Zoom court. So those have just been slight increases to the budget. And then, like I said, again, the internal charge is going to be discussed at a later time. There wasn't a lot of changes with this one. So do you guys have any questions?
I just wanted to say that I'm so thankful for Judge Blake. He's amazing. And thanks to Mayor Rogers and Judge Blake for getting the community court off the ground. It's awesome.
Actually, tagging on what Denise just said, we noticed that his pay has not increased in the last few years.
No, it
but-
has
But
not.
he's a contract guy, so I guess he's okay.
Yep.
Judge, if you're listening, we love you.
Yeah.
That would be a council action.
Yeah.
Actually, You can't do performance reviews for contract employees without getting into trouble and making them a real employee and having to pay them pensions and things. So, yeah. You could do a contract review. Okay, off you go.
All right. Were there any other questions on court? All right, we will move on. I think next up is police. Jeff will be joining me.
Okay, so I think what I'll do is just go right down the list, start with 2110, which is our police administration. Is that all right?
Go for it.
Yes, I should ask first.
Go, go, go. You're doing good.
Police administration, you'll notice in the budget this year reflects a lot, it's a lot more transparent that we have it's in the other administrative salary section. That's going to be our technology manager. So that's laid out. I think it's easier to find in the budget this year, much easier. Materials and services that's pretty flat, other than the internal charges went up. We do have a new item, and then again, this was for a little bit more transparency. We removed the capital outlay in 2120 and 2130, and we can cover those later, but those are patrol and investigations, and put it all under the police administration. I have control over all the, well, with Katie's blessing, I have control over that money anyway. So we're putting everything under police administration, pretty much where it belongs anyway. There won't be any expenditures without my and Katie's okay. Yeah, okay. Any questions with police administration?
Elise?
Okay, you probably just explained this, but why did administrative salaries drop? Did something get broken out and carried over into a different line
I
item?
didn't perform very well, so they took money away from me. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
No.
That honestly, I'll just save Katie I asked several times last year. I don't understand, and how do I explain this money? And I never did get a good answer from
A
the-
lot, it's like $114,000 less?
Yeah, so I think that what happened was part of the public safety technology manager was budgeted in that
Oh, like a per-
administrative services.
Part of FT.
Yeah, so now we've broken it out to make it more clear what's what in the budget.
So if you add those two lines together, it maps to what was last year.
Pretty close.
Ish,
Yeah.
ish,
Yeah.
Okay. It's, it's a little more, but so it may be different things in it, but that's why it went down. I think
And I know with Matt Zook leaving and then someone else coming in, I'm not sure it was 100% clear to them either, but it wasn't to me either, so. So I think if there's no other questions, we can go to 20. Oh,
I just
sorry.
have one quick question. I just out of curiosity, under the professional services, that jump,
Okay, I think that's one of those that we combined. So there was professional services and I think there was, gosh, I'm trying to find it real quick. We combined two accounts.
okay, the actual in
Yeah, because
2021.
Yeah, and we did that through, I asked Kate if I could do that throughout my whole budget because there was like small equipment replacement and then equipment replacement. It's like, why not put all that together,
Yeah.
take it out, because I can't keep, it's hard to keep straight when, basically what you end up doing is how much money is in this account? It's
Yeah.
kind of the same stuff.
I'm curious about, does it feel right to go back down? So like I'm looking at that line and the actual was 15,000 for last year. Does it make sense to go back down to the 6,500? Like, was that just a one-time expenditure?
yes.
Yes, sorry.
Which line item?
21, 10, 58,000, 580,000. 5, 8 with lots of zeros. Yeah, I guess I'm curious, was like that a one-time expenditure and you aren't gonna need it again? Or was that I guess
I got an answer.
okay, good. And cause I found a few of those in not just yours, but other places. And I'm just curious about when we spent twice as much last year, is that just a one-time or does it make sense?
So
Right, okay.
Yeah.
if you look at that same line item in 1920, I'm not sure why it went up to 15.5, but it looks like that's what we budgeted for. We probably just didn't spend all of that. And so
No,
they
you're doing
reduced
the
it the
same
next
thing-
year.
You're doing the same thing I did. I had assumed these were approved budget, they're actuals.
Oh,
Yeah. So that might be an open
Was
to-
it the police
to
chief
research.
It actually could have
that
been.
was, that could
It's-
have been, I
Yeah.
think it was more than that, but yeah, it could have been.
It is, of course, challenging for staff to be able to comment accurately on when it's a previous management team and we could go back and pull all the receipts and tell
Lee.
you what the item all added up to, yes.
I guess I'm more curious about when there is that much discrepancy, and I don't even just mean it on this one line item. I've seen that, like I said, I've seen it a couple times, and I'm just curious about when it's doubled like that, and then we're budgeting again down to half of the amount that we spent. Just whether that's a one-time thing, I'm gonna make the assumption it is, but I wanted to ask the question if that's a one-time thing, or if it's something that we went, oh, this is really something that's important and we need. Are we not getting what we need in the next year if we're not looking at that line item?
So
The-
Elise, do you have hold on, Elise, do you have a different comment or you were nodding, so I.
Yeah, I don't expect anyone to know exactly what someone else did, but there should be a way to track back to be able to articulate, because this is our fourth city manager. I mean, there's a turnover, so we do need to know what was spent in what line item.
So if I were to summarize, could I summarize this into a request to, for chief to ensure that that line item is at the level it needs to be at so that we don't get a surprise? Is that really what you're asking?
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, I don't even mean for this
Yeah,
line item. I
exactly.
just mean in places where it looks like we spent a lot more last year and we're back down to like
Right.
what we were before
Right.
in any department. I
Correct.
don't,
But right now we're doing this. So if there's an action item for the city staff, we just need to articulate it and they'll go do it. And it will come up again, and then you'll ask the right person to check that one.
Okay,
yes,
what?
I guess I'm just asking for anyone, if there is a huge discrepancy between what we spent last year and this year, which is not, especially on this line item, it's not a ton
not
of
big.
money, but the percentage is higher, is just to know, are you gonna get what you need out of half of the amount that we spent last year?
Exactly. And something to keep in mind is that last year there was a lot of expenses around COVID that were not the year before, and not this year. So, but tracking down, I guess the real question is, it's your budget, and if you under budget, you're going to be in trouble. So they're looking out for you, right?
I
Okay.
I actually just looked it up, and I think it was expenses related to an evidence case, and that's why it was costing a lot more money that particular year.
I can tell you also, after Katie looked it up, we agreed to look into grants for body worn cameras. So we also belong to Lexipol, which is our policy manual vendor. They have grant writing services, and I can see at least $5,000 of that was to be a member of that. And then to also apply for the body worn grant, which typically just to be the member, I think was the 3,000. And then there's 2,500 to write the body worn camera. That would have cost us 5,000 had we not been a member. It's kind of but we also get that for the next 3 years of half price grant writing. So that was kind of one time. I also see some things in here. We had a fairly big case that needed some analysis of blood that the state police crime lab does not do. So I don't know if it's one time, but those are things that if we ran over, and then, I'm sorry, I'm kind of double talking. Part of the other part is, the overall, towards the end of the budget is when some of these expenses were made, we were under budget. So I asked if we could use professional services in that account to overspend that line item. So thank you for pointing that out. That was a good reminder because I had forgotten that that's what we did. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and I guess I wanted to go back to, this is a general request of everyone. I don't want to feel like I'm putting people on the spot every time I go, we spent twice as much last year and now we're back down. Is that if there are some things in any budget that are a huge jump, just, I don't even need to know exactly what it was spent on, but more like, are we getting what we need in this next year?
Perfect. Will.
There was one other aspect to this that does play into the pattern that you're talking about. In many cases, department heads actually used a BCR form to reduce a number because they knew that we were going to be facing a lot of increases in COLA and in some other materials. So some of the ones that went down were staff consciously trying to do better to keep us under budget.
Okay, Elise? Or Ted, because you're sharing a mic.
I also just want to, so professional, okay, I thought I was interpreting professional services as like professional development services. So, that also could be helpful just for future of like people like me. But I would definitely not want to see professional development decrease as a,
No, that's where we usually pay like other outside vendors in general.
Okay.
So it could be professional development if we pay an outside vendor.
okay. So where's the professional development? Training?
Training.
Yeah, training.
$3,500? That's nothing. Okay, so I mean, I do feel like we're gonna start, Molly, we're gonna have to have some of these conversations.
So
This
it's-
is the place.
But raise it as what you want, rather than editorial about the budget. Say, are you covering this, and this, or something, right? So that he can respond.
But do remember the police administration covers 2 employees. It's the chief and the public safety.
I still
Technology.
think that that's very low.
Okay.
I usually get a coupon.
He doesn't look like he's kidding, actually.
I'm not above it. I'll do it.
So Elise, do you have a request, though? I mean, is there training that we want to make sure is in for those 2 folks?
Overall, I would like to request that as a city, we look at training and professional development as an dollar amount per FTE. That is how I've always thought of training and development and not a randomized number put into the budget. So I would propose for managers, it's 25, like department level head, $2,500 a year for themselves. And for staff level, $250 a person. Those are my numbers from work.
Well, and for me, it goes back to Lizelle's question is, have we budgeted for DEI training? And if there's not a specific line item for DEI training, then we have to look at the training budgets of each department and whether that is enough money to cover what would be an adequate DEI training. So I guess it's like domino effect is that it sounds like we have the money for it, but we need to see where that money is. And this seems like a very low number.
So if we
They're the
don't-
experts, so I'm not gonna say it's a low number, but just making sure, does that cover a good DEI training for that specific group?
Mike, you,
Well, I was just gonna say, there is annual, isn't it annual training for officers for certain aspects? So there's training going on anyways, right?
Yes, that's correct. Just to maintain our certifications. We have to
So-
and should do that.
I guess I would say unless there's a problem that arises, I think we ought to leave it up to the chief. If he thinks 3,500 is okay, then I don't know why we should really be questioning that at this point.
so I think the question that's already been put on the table is there's a concern about the diversity, inclusiveness, equity training and ensuring that the money is there. So we've got that on the table. As far as, I don't think you're asking about police training because that wasn't the focus for either one of you. Yeah, okay.
I wanted to comment really quick. The DEI training would probably come out of like the city manager's budget. It wouldn't be in a department. Yeah, because that would be citywide training.
So to add a bit more detail to that, once we've had a chance to design a plan thoughtfully, because previous administration didn't do anything except for some scoping, they didn't implement a plan. Once we have a chance to design a plan, then we'll be able to see if our resources are sufficient. If they're not sufficient, we can do a supplemental budget to make sure that they are.
Any other questions on police administration? Nada? Off you go.
Okay, so 2120 patrol. This budget reflects us moving back to our authorized strength of 35. Prior to this, we held 2 positions back during COVID and we, less revenue. We agreed, well, not we agreed. We held at 33. I will tell you, most of the time last year, we were probably, while we were authorized at 33 between retirements, injuries, surgeries, all that kind of stuff. There were times where we probably dipped down to about 27, 26, which makes it hard to cover a 24-hour day schedule, 7 days a week. So I'm extremely excited to get back to 35. We are struggling just like everyone else. Our hiring pool is very, very thin. We're shallow. Pool would be thin, shallow, not thin. But anyway, so we've been very fortunate to attract lateral officers, which decreases our cost. If you take a brand new police officer, it takes about really a full 18 months and they're not fully, they can't handle everything, I don't think, in 18 months. Whereas if you get the right lateral, you've probably got about 6 months. So you're looking at the difference between about 75,000 in that first 6 months versus about 225 to 250,000 of training that person. So we've been saving money in that direction. Plus, you're getting someone that knows how to arrest someone already and those types of things, the basics, they already know. The other significant change is the Newberg Dundee Public Safety Association agreed on a 2-year contract. Prior to that, they took a 0 during the open session of the wage opener of the contract and the last contract. That was a 4% that begins in 4% COLA in July. Another significant issue is we received a body worn camera grant after competitive pilot testing program. The department selected Axon. We really felt like everyone else is trying to catch up to Axon. We're hoping that with that, we can minimize any need for additional FTE. That was a big part of what we were trying to do. The more automated, the better. When we believe that product will help us the best. I also put together a 10-member panel to approve of our body worn camera policy. There were people throughout the community, counselors from Newberg and Dundee, Providence staff, school administration. I know just members of the community, business folks that we put together. I just completed that yesterday, all the changes that we had to make or needed to make. It's also already been approved by the Department of Justice. It was actually approved before we made our changes with the community. So that was a promise that I made that we would do that, and I feel good about making good on that promise. So that's really it for personnel services. The materials and services, that's basically flat.
Any questions there? I actually have one, but I get to go last, so.
I got one. So for the, I mean, I'm just concerned about the fuel budget. I don't know if, since it didn't change from last year with fuel going up, would that be enough or?
So I did look at that before we built the budget. It used to be, I think, $80,000 what was budgeted, even when fuel prices were small. So we reduced that because we were giving that money back and we didn't need to budget that much. Currently, right now, we're at about $46,000. We have 2 months left. So I feel pretty good about where we're at. If we need to come back with a supplemental budget, I mean, I feel good about 60. Even though prices are going up, I also believe, I think Public Works is going to have our own fueling station, so that should bring the cost down as well. So I feel good about where we're budgeted. As long as it doesn't get up to, 8, 9, 10, that'd be different.
And also to comment on that too, there's legislation out there about changing the percentage of ethanol in the gas. So that dramatically decreases the cost of gas at the pump. So that's at kind of the president level right now. So we're expecting that to pass and probably go to the governor at some point. So we're hoping fuel costs will be going down.
Other questions?
The capital outlay budget, was that the one that was moved to?
Yes, sir. That was all moved under administration.
Okay, so quick question, with the addition of body cameras, the need for people to go through the material and stuff is included in here? Because your headcount really isn't going up, you're
Correct.
recovering. How's that?
We're trying to be as frugal as possible. I've already talked with dispatch. They will be able to absorb some of the records functions, and our records folks will be more of the masters of, the repetition is what you need. We have to obviously do facial blurring. There's all sorts of things that we have to comply with to be able to push those out if we need to do that in the public. When those videos go to the DA's office, that's another thing about Axon. When the video will go to evidence.com is part of their where they store all of this stuff. That's the easiest way to say it. And then we will basically give a key to the district attorney, and they can go in and retrieve the videos themselves for court. So that's going to knock down on staff time as far as creating discs, getting them over to the DA's office, those types of things, and anything else that can happen in between. So we're trying to automate that as much as possible. And that's another reason why you'll notice Axon is not the cheapest, but we felt like during our trial and testing that it was the best for us and the best chance that we could not increase our FTE. And a lot of stuff is automated. A lot of things are automated.
Right. We talked about total cost of ownership and
Yes.
they had a good package. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, on to.
Okay. 2130 investigations.
That's actually one of the extra pages I gave you. There was a hidden cell. Didn't change the total dollar amount. It was just the dangers of working in Excel.
Sounds exciting.
It's the very top of the administrative salaries. Or did you already say that?
No,
Okay.
but that was a hidden cell.
She tried to hide it from me. I found it. It's not been that long since I was in detectives,
I got to keep him on his toes.
So that would be the increase. And I can tell you, this sort of encompasses investigations as well as communications. So many of you know, it's not a secret, Mary Newell retired. She was our support services manager. And while Captain Ferguson and I were in interim roles, we were a little light in the administrative area. We were just getting things done, you know, head above water with everything that was coming at us. I worked with the city manager to combine a detective sergeant and Mary Newell's position and create an administrative captain. So we actually reduced our FTE by 1. I felt it was better to reorganize that direction because I can have a sworn officer over many different departments versus support services really shouldn't be in command of sworn personnel. So that made sense to me. And we're a little more nimble to be able to adapt to legislative changes and things like that. But that did increase. So his primary role is to supervise detectives, investigations. We have a supervisor, dispatch supervisor that is the same person. So she reports to him. She can take care of the day-to-day stuff and he'll do the planning, the recruitment, those types of things, more the administrative level. Plus, if someone's on vacation in the administration, he can take over for patrol as well. So it's a lot more fluid position than what we previously had. And years ago, we had the 2 captains and chief model, and I felt like that would be the best way to go. We could actually get more work done and spread that supervision over more divisions. Again, we moved capital outlay, materials and services. We reduced that by $5,000. We're just not out buying drugs anymore based on the current legislation. So that seemed disingenuous to keep that money when it's basically for investigations. So we returned that back, and that was materials and services reduced by $5,000. Support services, we reduced the budget by the reorganization that I mentioned. Again, that was Mary Newell. Materials and services, that is a flat budget. Support services, by the way, is records. Our records folks. Police reserves, 2170. I'm sorry. I should ask, does anybody have any questions?
Questions on the investigation?
Sorry, I just have a question about overtime. It looks like across the board, you kind of went up an overtime. Is there a way that that's kind of, I don't know. Could you tell, why does that go up?
Why does that go up? It just depends on what cases you're working. We had with obviously COVID, we had illnesses, we have to cover schedules. We also have contractual issues. If a police officer goes to court, it's a minimum of 3 hours, whether they go for 10 minutes or 3 hours. We've done some things. Well, anyway, that's not what you asked. I'm sorry. So we have to cover the schedules. And at one point, I know half of dispatch was out. And then we lost several officers, like I said, to either injuries, retirements, and you still have to keep those schedules full. So
I guess what I'm asking about is the proposed numbers went up. quite
So
a bit.
those went up. So we kept the hours roughly the same, but it went up because of the COLA. So everybody will just be making a higher dollar amount on their overtime pay.
I'm sorry. She was obviously catching what you were trying to say.
That's why you're a team.
Yeah, well,
And just to clarify, the drugs you were out buying were not for use by the officers, they were for
not most of them, no.
use by the.
No. We would go out and do buys and stuff like that, yeah.
When you said that, I thought, that's on public record. Somebody has to clarify that. Somebody will turn it into something. Any other questions? Okay,
Okay, so I think we did 2150, not a lot of changes with that, just reduction and a flat budget. 2170 is reserves, our reserve department. We have 5 reserves, and that's basically stayed the same for quite a while. That's basically, well, not basically, it is flat. There's no increase or anything like that. And then we get down to communications. Let me catch up. 2310.
Just let me ask real quickly. I don't think there were, but are there any questions on the support services that he just went over? Good. 2310?
So with 2310, I covered the reduction in halftime FTE. There were no increases. That was just reduced for personnel services. Materials and service, really the only increase were the service agreements, that we have, that we really don't have much control over. I mean, it's contractual.
Questions on this? Okay. It's not your last chance, but he is going to get up and walk away. So if you, thank you.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
I really appreciate how the chief went through all the line items and actually tried to reduce some of them where possible. Simply knowing that we had COLA headwinds all through the budget. And I appreciate the way that all the department heads took that critical look at the line items. I know that's what some councillors had directed us to try to do.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to library then. I think 7:15 is still possible.
All right, so starting at the top, I have a much smaller thing to go through, so. As Katie said at the beginning of the meeting tonight, we did have some staff changes where we took a couple of positions and put them together, or brought staff up to 40 hours when someone else had left. So we had a couple of those changes. And then most of the other changes in budget is COLA related.
Yep, and then when we brought up some of those people to 30 hours or 40 hours, it did trigger benefits. So that also was an increase there, but ultimately that's good for our employees and that helps with retention as well in the library. So just to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I can actually tell you I was going to lose about 3 staff members. So the retention was really a big deal for us. And not because they don't love working at the library, but because people need benefits too. So. And are there any questions about that before we move on? All right, and then mostly the budget stayed the same. We didn't have a lot of changes. Travel and training did drop by $3,000. This last year, staff attended the Public Library Association training that was or conference rather, that was in Portland. So it was great to be able to send staff to that. I do have plans for that with Oregon Library Association conferences, which are not terribly expensive. So I'm really grateful for that. There's been a lot of online training recently too that we've been able to send staff to. So that helps keep training costs down as well. We are looking into working with a group called Freedom Lifted. They present an online training program called Justice at Work in Public Libraries. So we're going to be having a couple staff go through that in this budget year. So that's coming up pretty soon. And then the rest of that will come out of this next budget year as well. We also did have a staff person who was getting her master's degree, and some of that was coming out of, I believe that was coming out of that account as well. And she's almost graduated. So that's another great thing for the library is we have more staff with a great degree that's really helping her do better work in our library, and we're able to retain her as well. That's the other changes. Maintenance agreements were increasing by 5,500 due to RFID technology. RFID technology is the way that we have radio frequency stickers in our books, And that helps us retain books, actually. So items don't get stolen as often because we have a alarm that goes off when those go out the doors. It also makes it super easy for people to check out. If you've been in the library lately, you know we have an app on your phone that you can even check out with, or you can use the RFID pads that are inside the library to check out your items too. So those are important things for libraries today. Let's see, utilities is rising due to surging energy costs. The CCRLS, which is our regional library system contract, that is also increasing slightly due to cost and services. I'm nervous and I'm going really fast, so I apologize for that. I
You're
will
very
try to slow
clear
it
and
down.
you sound extremely calm. So just keep doing what you're
But
doing.
that's a lot of story time practice throughout the years. You're not as fun as toddlers, but it's okay.
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that.
I am good with crowd control if you get a little rowdy, so I can handle it. Are there any questions on anything so far?
I have the same question on your supplies and equipment. That jump for last year, is that like a one-time thing and you're still good with the 2650?
Yes. I just don't remember at this moment what that was for. Maybe my,
Yes, Corey. So we actually purchased a whole bunch of new RFID pads. The cycle before, we put in a new RFID gate during COVID, and some of the cost rolled over into this cycle. So mostly RFID equipment, which of course now causes our maintenance fees to be a little higher, but it's all good stuff.
Yeah, it looks like there was CARES Act money spent out of there for computers as well.
oh, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And a wand, yes. Let's see. Yes, so the capital outlay also is increasing 2,950 due to laptops and other equipment that are now covered by the library as well. And we do have quite a few computers because we have computers for the public as well as for staff too. We also did see a growth in reimbursement from CCRLS as Katie was saying in the beginning too. And that was really due to increased checkouts, which was really great. But I do want you to know that we benefited from other libraries not being able to be open as much as we were during the pandemic. And our staff really worked hard to be able to provide services to deliver books out to the curb. And a lot of other libraries were not able to do that. Our largest library, Salem Public Library, in our library system, they feel so terrible for them. They were actually are in the middle of a remodel when the pandemic hit. So it was just all kinds of it was really, really hard on the community. So so because of that, we actually benefited because our items were getting used more because other items weren't available. So that probably will go back down to what it was before. That's probably not a number it's likely to stay at. So I think that was all my, okay. Any questions then?
Questions? No, we can read you like a book. That's for Rick. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll move on to planning.
Good evening. Doug Rux, Community Development Director. So I've taken notes while I was sitting in the back. Page 12, question on FTE, where it said 11.8 for planning. I think Katie and I I think that number should actually be 10.75. There's reasons. So we had a planning manager position. He resigned. So I took the opportunity to take that position and split it into 2 assistant planners. We are out recruiting for a senior planner. That was formerly an associate planner position, and we're challenged with trying to. So we did some shuffling over this current fiscal year on numbers. So Katie and I will double check on that one number. So looking at the personnel costs, you can see they're pretty similar to what they were this year. Down just a little bit, and part of that is because we have new staff, and so they came in at the entry level, so we had cost savings with all of that. For the materials and services, it's pretty much a status quo budget. There are a few adjustments, and I will go through those quickly. Supplies and equipment, that's really for to having 2 monitors. And so we do a lot, most of our work is on a computer. So working with staff, so everybody's got 2 monitors. We got some old broken down chairs, so we're replacing those, and some iPads when we're out doing the field work and inspections for our tracking system. Travel and training went up slightly. That's because of the shuffle we've had in staff numbers. So to do the training, it costs a little bit more. But staff basically goes to 2 conferences a year. One is our statewide annual conference for planners, and then we go to legal issues. Though we're not attorneys, we have to go understand the law. So we go get a day's worth of training. So that's for 5 people to do that. For our grants, they're up a little bit, and part of that is we got grants that are splitting fiscal years. And so we had to budget what we're going to spend this fiscal year and then rebudget the numbers for next fiscal year. But we also got an additional grant that we've budgeted for next year, and that's a certified local government grant to look at doing community outreach about a possible historic district in the downtown area. Professional services is the other one. With staffing challenges and so forth, some things have been pushed back. So we did not get started on our urban growth boundary expansion as the council had authorized. So we've rebudgeted funds for that. We've also got to finish updating or adopting our housing needs analysis and economic opportunities analysis. Those could get appealed, so we need consultant services for that. We got some miscellaneous things, transcription services. We've got some match money we had to do for our code audit grant for multifamily housing that's in there. And we rebudgeted for this year the downtown parking analysis that was removed from the budget last year. DEI had come up, and yes, I budgeted this year for 2 staff to get DEI training, but as we're opening up from COVID, we haven't seen the material come out, and I budgeted for 2 staff in planning to go to DEI training next year, and that's a total of $1,300 for 2 people. And that's what I have.
Question?
Tell me about the bank fees.
Why'd they go up?
Yeah.
Well, we were in a pandemic, so the counter was closed, and so we had to retool, and people were paying by phone with their credit cards, which we have protocols of what we do once we have the numbers, and so everything gets shredded and so forth. Now that we're opening back up, we have more people coming in paying by check rather than by phone.
Yeah, it's something we're trying to look at because the city pays roughly $200,000 a year in bank fees, which is a lot of money to accept credit cards. Yeah, so it's something we're working with James on to see if possibly there's something we could do to pass on part of the fees for something. Obviously, we wouldn't want to do that for utility billing or court fees, but something, or I'm working with the bank to see if we can get a better rate even for our credit card processing. So anyway, that's what those are.
So even you can see from where we were at in the actuals in 2021, a little over 31,000, we had budgeted 21. And so again, since we've opened the front doors back up, as we mentioned at council, we're open from 8:30 to 4:30. We've been doing that for several months now. And so we're seeing more and more people now actually coming in and starting to pay with a check, and dropping off the material, having human contact, asking questions.
Also, it's possible that the Tyler technology software will allow different banking options, and that might also be a way to reduce our banking fees.
Mike?
So do we, like on a yearly basis, or is it every couple of years, do we go around and just find out different rates that banks will charge and try and just go to the best place we can, or how do we work this?
Yeah, I think it's something that should be evaluated probably like every year, every couple year. Right now, we have 3 different vendors that we use to accept credit card payments. One for core, one for utility billing, and then one for the online payments. And all of them assess different fees, and they all assess different fees based on what you pay. So if it's Visa, MasterCard, it's different than American Express or Discover. So we're actually trying to get all of them onto one company, and then we're trying to see if we can get a more competitive rate, because our rates are obviously pretty high to accept credit cards.
So are we on a contract? So, or not? If we're not, then we could change like on a yearly basis.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't think it's been revisited since 2009, because that's the most recent contract I've found. So it's something that I've been working with James on to see if we can get everybody on the same module and a lower rate.
Other questions?
I'm over here. Sorry. Not to beat a dead horse, but I just want to clarify something. So police are having their DEI training paid for by city manager stuff. Okay, but if you are having it paid this way,
You just put money in for it because you didn't know where it was.
okay. I just was thinking like, it seems like consistency would be awesome.
Well, I
I
think
just-
the one that would be paid for from city manager would be citywide training. So it would be consistent training for the entire city to get the same.
So I'm sure that he
Excellent.
would be happy to take that $1,300 from your budget and stick.
No, I
oh,
would
no,
never do
no,
that to Doug. No, so there may be certain types of DEI or other equity trainings which are specific to a certain profession. And in those cases, and of course, the example I know the best is the library world has excellent training for underrepresented people. We have DEI training of all sorts, and that training is library staff specific. So within that area, they would send people to that. My assumption is that this thing that Doug is talking about is similarly specific to the world of planning within the context of DEI. The dollar amount that we're going to get to in just a few pages would be centralized training of a variety of types that would come out of the city manager's budget, because it would be directed for everybody in the whole organization to take.
I can say for the planners in the last 2 years, when we do our annual conference, I mean, sometimes we do a joint conference with the state of Washington. There has been a heavy emphasis on DEI. So almost every topic had that woven in. So though we did not specifically have an opportunity to go get some specific training for DEI during the pandemic, we did get that training through our statewide organization.
So does police have specific training for that? I'm sorry to go back to this, but it just seems like that would be a need for our predominantly white community.
So to reference that directly, when I arrived in November, we were in crisis mode, and there was a number of things that had to happen extremely rapidly that had not happened. Compensation study, ARPA, beginning a budget process, and actually resetting the moral tone of the entire organization. Those were my initial focuses. As council knows, for the second half of the next 6 months, I or whoever is the city manager should be looking at a series of more detailed trainings of a variety of sorts. And actually, since this question has been brought up, I'm going to go over some of those when I get to the city manager's part of the budget. I agree, we should scope if there are specific things that each department can access. And I'm sure there are some within the public safety realm.
Other questions for planning? Thank you, Doug.
Okay, so to finish up the general fund, we just have some transfers out. So we have transfers out for the debt service fund that pays for part of our bypass loan primarily. And then we have transfers out for the economic development fund that pays for majority of the salary for our economic health manager. And then we have our reserves on here. So you can see our general contingency is pretty close to what we had this year, which is good that we've been able to keep that chunk of money there. And then the other contingencies here that are assigned to departments, that was from that move, from the closure of that Fund 32 money. So these were the ones that they had been saving in there, and now it's in the contingency for them since that fund is now closed. And I
Any-
think that's it for the general fund.
Any questions on that? No. Okay. Our favorite fund.
I know. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the revenues. So like I said before, this is an internal service fund, so it derives its revenues from the other funds within the city. So it's kind of a complex formula to do a cost reimbursement basis. So we have to go through and determine all of the administrative overhead we have, like our finance department and IT and all of the other departments that are in Fund 31. And then we also have to go through to do all of the shared services like postage, telephones, internet, and all of those get divvied out into the other funds. And the other funds have to pay into this fund. And it's based on a percentage, like the general fund pays 50%, and then the street fund also pays water, wastewater, stormwater, and the building inspection fund. So basically all funds that have personnel all pay into this fund to a portion. So that is where they get all of their revenue with the internal charges. And you can see the beginning fund balance of this one decreased quite a bit from last year. We know that was just due to the legal expenses that we took this year. Even with some of our cost savings efforts to not fill vacant positions, it still took quite a bit of a hit, but you know, the internal service funds are essentially what you want to make them. So our transfers this year are larger to try and make up some of that deficit.
Questions on that? Y'all know? Okay.
All right. We'll move on to the city manager.
And I too have been taking notes. So first of all, in terms of FTE, at one time, there were 2 FTEs in this area, and we went down to 1 back in 2020, 21, and it's staying at 1 projected to be for this year. So in other words, there will only be 1 person in this fund. If you go down to one of the very last lines here, because many of the things have not needed to be changed, the professional services fund is where training money would come from that could be utilized for citywide efforts. Now, in the previous year, there was the idea that we would do a strategic planning retreat as well as training from this line item, which was budgeted at 31,200. It is my opinion that we can do a strategic retreat with the new council in January without having to expend much money on that at all, and can therefore save the remainder towards general training. So what this would mean is that we would reach out to one of our community partners, for example, George Fox College, or perhaps the school district, whoever it may be, to give us a facilitator to do our strategic retreat without having to run up any billable hours to do so. So in other words, a line item that would have done 2 things in the past would be strictly focused on training. Now, this is a bit off the cuff because I wasn't expecting to talk about this, but here are some of the things that I do intend to see roll out over the next 6 months. Council already knows about most of these because of a presentation I gave at City Council recently, but let me just summarize. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to redesign the personnel manual entirely so that it has a DEI equity and strive-based lens. In other words, we're going to go through that methodically with the help of a new task force that we're going to set up, which is going to be composed primarily of Latinx staff members, all of whom we now have in different departments. So they're going to bring some of their cultural and lived experiences into that process of looking through the documents. We're planning to make the manual more modularized so that it fits also more tidily into the structure of having multiple collective bargaining agreements. So that's one of the parts of this. Another thing that we're going to do is for people that are in supervision and leadership, we're going to do DISC analysis. And DISC analysis is far superior to Myers-Briggs in terms of exposing people's personality types and traits, and it can also be used to expose both implicit and explicit bias patterns in people's forms of cognition. So that's another element, and that's going to cost some money. That's probably going to cost $1,400-1,500 for an expert for a couple of days. There will also be general DEI training, which will be vetted by the new Latinx task force, and Ezekiel and Zaira are going to be on the task force, and there's going to be a couple of other staff members on it. They're going to help me with that as my brain trust in that area. We're going to lean into Oregon Library Association examples, frankly, because I find them to be very effective. But the delivery mechanism for some of these trainings will be the NeoGov platform, who is covered in the funding that you will find later in the HR section of the budget. So NeoGov has a wide range of trainings that we can access at very low cost. They're all nationally accredited, and these will be mandated for all staff. With regard to the remaining money, I'm not sure yet. I actually have to devise a plan on what other organization-wide trainings that we're going to need to do. But those are some of the takeaways and highlights of what I do intend to see roll out over the next 6 months.
Mike, $5, please.
I'm just curious, are you planning to compensate your Latinx employees that are helping to do this manual revision but even so, it's a heavy lift
It's a
for
minority tax.
people of color to have to
And
do something like
my
that.
other question is, why only Latinx? Do we not have any African Americans that work in City Hall or any other diverse people?
We do, but based upon the demographic makeup of the city, I wanted to have that as our first focus. So it's not that we're certainly not discriminating against anybody, but as I say, the plan for this hasn't even been derived yet. So I was merely giving the highlights because over the last 7 months, I've been dealing with some other
Oh,
things.
I appreciate that. But, well, I would like you to, think about the other people besides the Latinx in City Hall to see how they feel about just having Latinx part of this task force.
Well, I wasn't saying that there wouldn't be other trainings or other things undertaken. It's just that this is the first one that I clearly saw that I need to do. So it's not singular or atomic in nature. There will probably be other things, but as I say, I am at something of a disadvantage because we haven't started any of this effort yet because
So
of the,
we've got some input, which,
yes.
and then Steph also had a,
Would you be willing to pay the people of color on your staff an additional stipend? Because it is an additional
No, never.
task
We
that
would
they're
never.
not hired to do. That's an additional amount of effort that is always expected and not compensated usually, so.
Yes, speaking as a person who is from a library background and who has been in the forefront of DEI work for many, many years before the term was even invented, I am absolutely willing to compensate and help anybody who is willing to lean into this effort. But as I say, I just do not have a plan as yet for, because
Rick, you had a.
I was just going to say, Lozelle, just a little bit of background and even something as simple, and we asked this 3 years ago, probably something as simple to say, how many people of color do we have working at the city and what departments do they work in? That was not a question that we could find easily answered. And this was just because of the record, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but because the record keeping was simply not to the point where we could do it, which stunned me. I mean, but that's it. So even that baseline data was hard to come by. So.
to put it another way, we are literally at zero right now starting. And we have so much to do, but we have nothing, we're not on a platform that we're building from. We're building everything from scratch.
Okay. So you got some good input there. And how about the rest of your budget? Yeah.
Well, everything else is fairly status quo.
Okay. Questions? It's always difficult when we start going into how we're going to solve difficult problems. And one of the things that you have to try, but it's almost always a mistake, is to start talking about your plan before you've got one. So now you got some good input. Go forward. I think Lozelle would like to help. Okay. Other questions on the budget?
I just want to make a comment. I do appreciate you stepping up in this mess, because it was a mess. And coming from my background, I know what it is to feel like coming into a mess and you have to have priorities. And what you have done so far is amazing. So
Yeah, that's very kind.
And I appreciate that, May. And as we begin to move through this thing, we already know we've only got like 40% of the basic things that you would expect a city to have are done in the last 7 months. And we have at least 60% more we haven't even touched. Like our personnel manual is horrific. We haven't had these training programs organized in a regular way. And we're just at the beginning.
Questions? Well, I'm sorry about your $5, Mike, but on you go, Kate. Oh, no.
It's an
not
IOU.
Another, I forgot my wallet. Oh, no. I think we better grab control of this again because the puns that spring to mind are totally inappropriate. So Katie, please.
Yes, all right, so we'll move on to page 44, human resources. So human resources, we have budgeted in the HR manager that we are still hopeful to recruit. And then we still have our part-time project specialist in here as well. And that's all that we have for human resources. Last year, we had the ACM budgeted in this as well, which we are not looking to refill at this time, just purely due to cost. So that's the big shift on that one. And then we had some reductions in some of the budget, like dues and meetings. We just weren't spending. Same with the recruitment expense. We weren't spending the full 8,000 this year, so why budget the full amount? And then professional services, that's our NeoGov platform, and that's the exact amount to pay for the contract.
And if I could add a little bit about that, the NeoGov platform is incredibly valuable. Not only is it our recruiting tool, and it actually has already been tweaked to include some good DEI practices, including masking certain types of names and other things like that to create a more of a blank slate. So people are not with their biases pre-qualifying hiring pools. It also comes with a suite of literally thousands of training courses of all sorts, and you can query it to shape a curriculum or add your own curriculum to that. And so that's something that we're going to definitely be doing.
And NeoGov directly interfaces with the new financial software, so that was a really big plus. Yeah. I know. All right, so, oh, yes.
So is this position, HR management position, is that salary competitive? Because there is such a need for so many higher level staff. So is this salary in line with all the work that they are going to be doing and to be competitive?
That we don't know quite yet because the class and comp study that we're doing is not in yet. So we will find out. This is currently our HR manager scale. So this is, if that needs to be tweaked, then we'll know from the class and comp. But there is an overall cushion in the budget to account for those things. So if we have to move this one up and not make a change to others, that's possible too.
With the bit of crystal ball gazing, I
Yeah.
suspect that's probably not enough.
Yeah,
So with the work they have to do with Newberg.
yeah. We suspect some positions are going to need to be increased and then some probably are already at market rate. Time will tell. Are there any other questions on HR?
I guess just one. Is it class and comp study, is that for all admin positions or is it
That's
just
for citywide.
citywide? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Yep, the police, we still did it, but we've already bargained that, so their class and comp is not gonna affect their pay at all, but it's for the rest of the city.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right. We will move on to city recorder. So city recorder last year had both of part of Zyra and Sue in the administrative salary, so we broke that out just to be more transparent now between administrative and clerical salaries. So that's kind of the change on that one. And those are the two that make up this department. For the changes, we had a decrease to the meetings, the dues and meetings and the supplies, just because they weren't using any of that budget. And they wanted to increase their travel and training to account for more in-person conferences and to include Zyra in some of those with Sue. And then professional services were also decreasing just because we're trying not to contract out as much work. And there were a few other contracts that were included in that we're not going to be doing next year. And then we also have the addition of capital outlay. So this is trying to just do some future savings for replacing iPads and cell phones, because I think this is where all of the committees and council's phones lie, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so. And that is most of the changes on this budget. Are there any questions on city recorder?
Who's having a lovely vacation right now?
Yeah.
It's a country vacation, not overseas location, undisclosed.
Also known as Victoria, Canada.
I was trying to be mysterious.
So much for non-disclosure agreements, right?
Yeah.
Does the equipment is stuff like this, because we had such problems at the beginning of the year with trying to get this to work. Is that facilities or is that part of Sue's world or
No, I think this might actually be an IT's budget.
IT? That would
Yeah,
make sense.
we're trying to put a
Nope.
lot more of the,
IT shaking his head.
Not in the
No. Okay.
all right.
All right. I just didn't know if Sue was going to try and do it with that amount of money, it was going to be a
We'll need to
problem.
talk about this.
I'm sure it'll be taken care of.
We
Okay.
were trying to move the cost of cell phone replacement and iPad replacements more to the departments, just instead of making that all IT's responsibility to come up with the money.
Right.
So that's why you'll see some of those shifts in there.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to community engagement. So community engagement, this year had 2 FTE. This year we had a community engagement manager and a community engagement specialist. Our community engagement manager left partway during the fiscal year and we chose not to replace that position, mostly as a cost saving effort for Fund 31. And we just also didn't think there was the need to replace it right now. So we currently have just our 1 FTE in there, and we have some part-time help from one of our graphic designers at the library who's filling in for just some additional need and additional hours as we need them. So that's one change in personnel on that one. For the materials and services, office supplies and dues and meetings increase just because there's more graphic work that we need and there's just a few more programs that they need. Would have been nice to have had Adobe when we did the budget, but we do not have that. So we're hoping to get that next year. Travel and training decreased just because we have 1 FTE instead of 2 in this fund. And then professional services also decreased. This year we did a contract with Slate to do some of our rebranding of the logos, and that's completed now. So we were able to decrease that budget. And then they have also just a small capital outlay number just for also the savings for cell phones and the iPads in the future. Do we have any questions on this one?
Looks like none.
None. All right, the next one is finance. So we still have one vacant position in there for our financial analyst that we are still hoping to hire. And we're waiting for the class and comp studies to come back because I feel the reason we didn't get any candidates for the last time we recruited was because the compensation is not up to market par. So we will see what that one comes back as, but the FT, that's the only change in the FTE there. Office supplies. Actually, that one didn't change. The bank fees, we talked about, we increased that just because we've had a lot more payments come in for City Hall and other payments we take for that. Contractual services went up. This is the program that we pay for our lien searches for our loan deferral. So that one was just a contractual agreement that went up slightly. Professional services, this pays for our audit fee. And this year, because of ARPA, we're gonna have to have a single audit, which is a audit of our federal grants. So that was a much larger cost just because of the ARPA money. So that accounts for that increase there. Telephones increased just because of contractual prices. And utility billing, or the finance billing section. We had a slight increase in contractual services. This is our bend mailing, which is what we use for our utility billing statements that we mail out. There was just a slight increase on that. And I think those were all of the changes.
Questions for Katie? I have one, Katie.
Uh-huh.
The ARPA-driven audit, did we not think of holding some of the ARPA funds to cover that, or is that not allowed? I don't know if it is or not, but I hate to dip into the city for.
Well, typically, it just depends on how much federal revenue you get. So I think we were looking to have this single audit anyway, because we're also receiving that CGV, CDBG grant, which is also a large dollar amount of federal money. So I think we were looking to have it
You're gonna
anyway.
do it
but
anyway? Okay.
yeah.
Other questions? Yeah, it's like, oh, sort of like,
Yeah, that's the cost of doing business when you get a lot of money.
okay.
All right, we'll move on. IT.
Hello. So looking at our budget, the big difference in our personnel is the backfilling of the systems administrator role that is currently vacant. In the 21-22, we lost the manager position. I stepped into that role, so next year we're going to rehire my role. And I believe that's what accounts for the changes in our personnel, with the additional buffer of whatever may come back from the compensation study. Moving on to materials and services, almost everything is staying the same with two big increases. Our maintenance agreements is essentially the software licensing for everything that's universally used in the city. If a department has their own software, it's typically handled under their maintenance agreements. This is a big jump because last year we had put in for what our maintenance agreement should have been, but that was denied. So our 21-22 is actually what our software and maintenance cost 2 or 3 years ago. So we're making up that jump. In addition to some expected increases that we already know about, Microsoft has announced they're increasing their Office licensing by 15% between this coming year and the year after. And there are a couple of vendors that are changing their licensing models so that it's going to be more expensive with potentially some value add that we may or may not see. So that's why that's a pretty big jump. It's a couple of years in one item. Moving down to the capital outlay, if any of you were here for the ARPA discussions, this was something that was brought up where the IT department typically goes through a boom or bust cycle where our equipment gets so old that it becomes a crisis. So we come to budget committee and ask for one big lump sum to replace one thing. And then we are too scared to come back the next year and ask for more. So Will and I went and we essentially tried to put together a list of everything that the IT department knows is a valuable asset, what its depreciation cycle is, how many years should we keep this before we replace it? And what does that cost look like for a year-to-year basis? If we can roll this over, will this be enough to replace this equipment when it should be replaced? That's the number you see there. It's just for hardware we know about. A lot of the cost is based on what we may have paid for the server 4 years ago. So we know that this number will more than likely have to be adjusted as prices go up. But replacing a server or a piece of hardware equipment 5 years from now, you can get better, more efficient technology. You may need a weaker piece of equipment because the technology in 4 years can do everything we need. So the cost is hopefully going to be what it was when we first bought it. But this is something we'll evaluate from a year-to-year basis. We are starting several years behind on this because some of our equipment is already old. We already have earmarked things that we're going to be spending this on in the coming year, but that's what that number is for.
And the IT department in some cases had been buying their equipment from eBay because they didn't have sufficient funds to buy the hardware.
Oh, because it was no longer being sold new, which was shocking. Questions for IT? Thank God for ARPA funds.
Yes,
That picture would look a lot worse down there.
but
Okay.
unfortunately, the supply chain means we still haven't gotten some of that stuff we ordered.
Everything has to work through the snake. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, city attorney's office. So for personnel, this has our paralegal, our prosecutor, and our code enforcement officer. So that's the same as what we've always had, no new personnel there. And then nothing changed on the materials and services, except we moved the cost of Miller Nash to legal expenses, which is where we actually record the expense. So I'm not sure why we budgeted in professional services before. So we just basically shifted it where we actually record it in the general ledger. And other than that, nothing changed on their budget.
Questions?
So James started, or Miller Nash started, was it January of last year when he started as an attorney for the city?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, or was it in 2020? 21? Okay.
Okay.
Just because I just don't know. Is there a contract that's so long with them, or how do we have that set up?
I think it's a year-to-year contract that we
year-to-year?
have. Yeah,
Okay.
It is, it's a year-to-year contract.
yeah. And obviously with our contract too, it's based on the use of it. So we could come under budget or we could go over budget depending on legal services. Obviously, this year was still an oddity, so we're hoping to get back to normal next year.
Other questions? Greg?
What's the story on administrative salaries? Adopted budget was 0, but we ended up with 175K in that, in actual.
So I think the adopted budget last year was because we had Miller Nash. So we didn't have a city attorney. So the previous year, I believe we still had a city attorney. Does that sound right? Yeah, okay.
Just think, next year, you'll know all this stuff. Because it happened while you were here. That's good. Other questions? Okay.
All right, so fleet.
I must say,
So fleet maintenance, we have 2 FTEs that work in fleet. However, that's not reflected in here because they are parsed out through the other utility funds as well, because they support the maintenance of all of the equipment across the city, from police, water, wastewater, storm, and all that. So that's not an accurate reflection of what they do. Maintaining over 110 pieces of rolling stock, 180 pieces of equipment, plus we also maintain CPRD and school district equipment for them as well. Basically not much in the way of changes. In there, one of the things we're looking at is books and publications. They're really not books and publications, they're subscriptions. As equipment changes, we have to change with it, and it's electronic. A lot of it is plug and play as far as reading codes off of equipment. This doesn't accurately reflect the cost of maintenance of fleet because it's, again, parsed out through all the other departments are paying for that. Once upon a time, it came through here, and it was kind of like a slush fund. But we quit doing that, and it's now accurately out of the departments. To talk to fuel, one of the things that we are in the process of doing, and it's through other capital project, taking a look at bringing in our own fuel station, on-site fueling. We can take advantage of state contract pricing for fuel, which means I can get it for about $1 less than you can at the gas station because of their bulk availability that they get. One of the other things that Jeff didn't touch on is we manage the fuel cards that are currently being used for fueling, which is under state contract pricing. So the pricing is spot pricing plus 17 cents a gallon. So it fluctuates. It can fluctuate in a day on the price. So we have done that to control fuel costs as well as best we can. Questions on fleet?
No, you can go fleetly on. Just checking to see if Jeff was awake in the back.
Yeah. Facilities. Facilities, again, we have 1.5, 2 FTEs in facilities. And again, they're parsed out amongst all the other utility funds on there. So it doesn't really accurately reflect that. No changes in that. You'll notice some of the numbers jumping around, especially in 2020, 2021. COVID had a major impact on facilities and facility expenses that we had. Some of the mandates that came down, making some of the changes to the facilities to accommodate that, to keep staff operating, keep people inside. Dealing with some of those issues. Some we are still in the process of getting refunded through FEMA, but we had to make some significant expenditures. Some of the ones that you will see is supplies and equipment. We're hoping to go back down, but we had to masks, shields, sanitizer, a lot of that stuff jumped around. One other thing a question that's been asked before by Councilor Finley is we have expended the funds in the line item where they should be, rather than taking money out of another line item, and it kind of hides what happens. So sometimes you'll see a line item that's pretty big, but it's underspended in another line item to account for the actual expenditure of it. And that's what we did with a lot of things here in facilities. Contractual services, that is our maintenance of our HVAC systems. That's important to the operation. For those that don't know, there's 14 of them on the roof of this building that we have to take care of to continue to maintain the air. So that is part of that. Other major expenditures, obviously, is utilities for all of the buildings that we have. We're not anticipating a major change in that, and I actually have a meeting tomorrow with our PGE rep to discuss what we're looking at over the next 12 months. Facility maintenance, building repairs. And again, this is the numbers that jump around because we spend them in the building, account for it in the building where we need to do it. One of the big numbers you see there from a year ago in public safety, we actually had 2 of the HVAC units, which were original on the building, die. One was over this room. Fortunately, we weren't using it that much. Another one was over the detectives area, which chased all of them out of the building for a while because they thought the building was on fire. They didn't know how to put the fire out. They just knew how to run. They're good at that. But we're anticipating, because of the delays that we've had for 2.5 years in the buildings, and not doing a lot of the work that needed to be done to maintain them, we've got some additional catch-up work to do. Some modifications and some things like that to deal with. So that's where our numbers are jumping up a little bit in there. Janitorial services. Again, cost, and it's a contract that we have. They do an excellent job in all of our facilities, but a lot of the cost is additional sanitation. They're wiping down and disinfecting all the hard surfaces, which they were dusting before. They're cleaning all the hardware, doorknobs, and disinfecting them, doors. They'd wipe down the doors, but they weren't disinfecting them. So any of the hard touch surfaces, so we had to ramp that up. So that's an increased cost that we realized with that. And we'll continue to do so into the near future. So that's the majority of the facilities. Are there any questions? Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russ.
Oh, you want me to stay and talk about I got one more in the contingency.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, on the next page in the reserves and contingencies, you can see a lot of the numbers have been shifted around from the previous budget. A lot of that was shifted in here from the previous person to account for it when Fund 32 became obsolete. But you'll notice that we have fleet and garage equipment in contingency, and that is hoists, some of the ODB, onboard diagnostic equipment. It changes. We're on version 4 now for it. There was 1, 2, 3, 4. And obviously they don't make them so you can update them. You just buy a new one. But keeping up with technology on the vehicles and equipment is part of that. Assigned for facilities, that's the money we use for major repairs. And one of the things that we've done, you can see that that's gone down, is we've actually shifted that, if you look back in facilities, to some of the buildings to account for some of the work that we're anticipating for replacement of HVAC units, some other major replacements. Rather than keeping it into that fund, we actually put it back into those maintenance funds that we're utilizing for the buildings. So that's the contingency part. Questions?
To the left, none. To the right, none. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.
I think the only other thing to talk on here is insurance. So that's our CIS. Premiums have gone up close to 20%. And so that's accounts for that increase on those as well.
Question, Mike.
So I understand with CIS, it's a group plan. But just to keep everybody honest, have we gone out and gone to maybe a large independent agency that works with cities and stuff like this, just to see what's out there in the marketplace?
You'll be surprised by this, but CIS owns the market basically, unless you self-insure, like some of the large cities like City of Portland or City of Salem. It's CIS or nothing. Yeah. So, yeah, not an option. Yeah. There's no competition.
I would like to say, good work on Fund 31. If you look at the bottom line on page 53, for all the mess that you've had to plow through and all of the hardship that came our way last year. It didn't go up much.
Well, part of that is thanks to Corey for letting me stay on the library budget, which kept my salary out of Fund 31.
So I know a lot of work by all your staff in trying to push down costs so that people could get the raises they didn't get. So, okay,
I think that's it. Do we-
any final questions before we remind you that if you can look at the material for next week, and if there are specific questions you'd like them to incorporate, email ahead of time and they will be happy to do it. And you email it to Katie and Will?
Yes,
And they
yes.
will-
And next time we're talking about the public safety funds, which are Fund 13, 16, and the small one, 3, which doesn't change much. The community development funds, and then the public works funds. So a little bit more to get through, but this went pretty quickly. So-
This is light years better than last year, really. Last year was a little scary. We had a shift in finance, right, before the end, so we had someone in trying to do it. So it's lovely. Thank you very much. This is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Ian,